In 1904, Taunton School debated the following motion. This house believes that exams are a poor judge of a man's ability. That motion was passed by a significant majority. I'm not convinced that over 100 years later we've really worked out for ourselves how best to really assess what schools are for and how they generate success. In 1992, under John Major, the Conservatives introduced league tables. These league tables focus on attainment, and for the last 25 years, again, they have dominated what schools are for, and more importantly, what parents believe is important. We spend our lives often focused between those difficult balances between happiness, and yet we're demanding the A grades and the B grades. But what does success really feel like today? 15% of working people suffer from a mental health illness. That currently costs the UK economy £8 billion. The second thought, Richard Riley, and it's a much-used quote, education has to prepare young people for jobs which do not exist, using technologies that we haven't invented, and possibly solving problems that we don't even know exist. I suppose the third thought is, have we got this fundamentally wrong? What if attainment is not actually very useful when it comes to being successful? What if we actually should be looking at something completely different if we really want to help young people go into a world which Richard Riley talks of? I'd like to talk about 4 seminal moments in my own life. When I was 8 years old, I was very fortunate that my parents sent me to a private prep school. By the time I was 11, I'd appeared in Gilbert and Sullivan, Pirates of Penzance. I was in the school choir. I'd learnt 2 musical instruments. I loved Latin. I played sport all the time. And I felt incredibly happy. Now, my parents, at the age of 11, wanted me to sit the exam for the local grammar school, the Free State School. And the test that I had to sit was one of IQ. Was I good at maths? Was I good at verbal reasoning? So I sat down, along with everyone else in East Kent, and I sat the test. The test would determine whether I went to the grammar school or whether I went to the secondary modern. And you always knew you'd pass because the postman would have to ring the doorbell for those who passed because the envelope was so big, presumably because they thought we could read the information. If you went to the secondary modern, you got a small envelope. When that day came and the postman rang the doorbell, a huge sense of relief for me because I'd been told I was going to be successful. That very first moment in which IQ was put across to me as the only thing that really matters. So off I went to secondary school. I went to the grammar school. I did very well academically. I went to a very good university. But IQ is a funny one. IQ and attainment have become the things that have really formed the landscape of our education system over the last 25 years. Even to the extent now that that's really all that matters in schools. To the extent now that that's all that parents are looking for when they're considering the options for their children. And in the independent sector, I think it's getting even worse because certainly in and around London, we're having the pre-test for the test for the child to go to secondary school. The last thing really in this is twofold really. The one thing when I reflect is about colour. When I was at prep school, the colours in my own mind, in my own imagination, are vibrant. The colour when I was at secondary school was monochrome. I didn't do singing, I didn't do music. Grammar school life was about doing well in exams. That was the focus. When I went for my first job interview after university, that was really all I had in my head. So I went for my first job interview and I remember the lady asking me, "So what can you offer this company?" And it was at that moment I had a bit of a thought, I don't really know actually. What do you mean? I've got good A-levels, I've got a good degree. What more do you want? When I finally did find a decent job in London, it really dawned on me even worse, because I suddenly started to work with people who, when they were 11, failed 11 plus. Or maybe I was working with people who got 3 C grades, and yet they were much better than I was at the job. And it really started to make me frame my thoughts. Maybe I was just being naive, but the point is, maybe my education didn't challenge me to think about the right things. The last thing really that's quite seminal for me have been 3 TED Talks. The first two have been viewed by over 60 million people. So Ken Robinson's talk about creativity in schools is something which really hits back at this whole focus on attainment, hits back at this focus on science and maths being the only things that matter within our education system, and hits back at this belief that everything has to be measured for it to be of value. The second one is Angela Duckworth's talk on grit. I mentioned to you about being fundamentally wrong. Well, what if we were fundamentally wrong, that actually attainment is the thing that's important? Her talk is incredibly persuasive and says actually the most important thing in young people is they learn how to cope with adversity. That's the most important predictor for whether they go on and succeed later on in life. And the last one is a talk by Martin Seligman around positive psychology. Now, as I stand here as the deputy head of this wonderful school, I tried to package all of these thoughts up into something over the summer, and it's work that I've been doing with other colleagues. And we've come up with a very simple idea that success is as easy as ABC. But before I do that, I want to just share with you why I'm attracted to even work at this school. What is it about a school like this that has colour? Well, for me, an outstanding school is one which is like family. When we look at the school refusal rates amongst young people, it's because school doesn't feel as good as home. School should feel like a place where you fit in, where you feel valued, where you feel you can be yourself. The second thing that I loved about the school is that creativity is at the heart of what we do, whether it's in drama or in music, or students' love of their liberal arts subjects, or, dare I say it, just the students' love of setting up their own societies and being creative in the way that they express themselves. Which brings me to ABC, really. ABC is just a fundamental idea that young people, if we're going to give them the very best education, are going to come across adversity every day. And that's something that's okay. That's something really that we must celebrate. After all, you can't fail if you didn't bother to try in the first place. And once you've tried and you show commitment, you'll learn something about yourself that perhaps you would never have done if all you thought the school was about was getting a good maths score. The second thing, the B, about building up a system of beliefs. Am I principled? Do I actually know the difference between right and wrong? Am I able to actually show judgment about what I should be putting my energy into and perhaps what I shouldn't be putting my energy into? Even more fundamentally, is my thought process about other people or is it about me? Because kindness and gratitude are things which are incredibly important in any workplace, whether it's a workplace in 20 years' time or the workplace today. And the final thing, C, is about consequence. I'm actually able to work out what the end game is going to be here for me. Because I hadn't done that. When I sat there having my interview, I hadn't really worked out what education had really done for me, other than I'd simply done what was put in front of me. They happened to be exams, I did them, I did well. So ABC really is a focus on what enables young people, we feel very strongly, to move from this environment into their next environment and cope. Because we have to be honest. When we think about what school is really going to do for these young people, we must be measuring something that is not simply attainment. I think we've got to measure achievement. And they're two very, very different things. Achievement is about where I started and where I ended up. It's about measuring the journey that a young person went on and what they achieved along the way. And we have the ability to do that now. We have the ability to measure their ability to commit, their ability to be creative. And if we're not measuring those things and we're not actually talking about those things, we're sending out the wrong messages to young people. I want to leave you with maybe 3 thoughts. The first thought, and it comes out of the Angela Duckworth video. She was asked the hypothetical question, can I learn grit? She said, I don't know the answer to that. I think we have the answer at this school. You can learn grit if your reward system reflects it. You can learn grit if the role models that you put in front of young people display those qualities. You can learn grit if every tutorial that you have focuses on how we're helping and nurturing and supporting young people to get through their difficulties and move on to the next stage in their lives. You can show grit if the language in every lesson is one which is inclusive, is caring, and brings out the best in every individual. The second thought is, what's the world of work going to be like? Now, I admit that these figures can change and a balance sheet is only a snapshot, but at the moment, the Hilton Hotel Group is worth an estimated $20 billion. It employs 170,000 people. Airbnb, worth $30 billion, employs 130. Walmart, $244 billion, employing 2.3 million people. Amazon, $450 billion, employing 350,000. I think the world of work for our young people will be more binary. It might well end up being even more haves and have-nots. That therefore means that our young people will have to be even more creative than we had to be. They're going to have to be even more resilient to cope. In other words, they're going to have to see the world through the prism of opportunity rather than through the prism of negativity. And that means that just because they did well academically at school, they're going to probably have to reinvent themselves at the age of 30, at the age of 40, at the age of 50. They might end up having to go back to university, in effect, 3, 4, 5 times. And we want them to be able to embrace that. We want them to be able to feel that's a really positive thing rather than something which is negative. So the final point I hope that I can put across today is I hope that what we do at this school can be mirrored far greater within the whole of the United Kingdom. And we can move away from a focus on attainment, and instead we actually start to believe that success is as easy as A, B, and C. Thank you.